in Manchester 10 years ago, the police did a training exercise for what would happen if a suicide bomber went off. The actor playing the terrorist shouted, "Allahu Akbar." All the local police in Manchester had to apologize for this. It was terrible to have done this. It was condemned as Islamophobic by all these monitoring watchdogs. And then it turned out that the suicide bomber at the Manchester Arena was an Islamist terrorist, and he detonated about 9 months later.
Hi guys, this is Sahar TV, and in today's video we'll see Douglas Murray on Islamic groups in the UK and why it's Islamophobic apparently to criticize those groups. Let's watch.
Joining me now is Douglas Murray, author of a number of international bestsellers, including his latest book on democracies and death cults, Israel and the Future of Civilization. Douglas, let's start in the UK, where it's apparently Islamophobic to accurately report on Islamist terrorism, such as the Manchester Arena bombing. Descriptions such as a knife-wielding man yelling Islamic slogans have led to complaints lodged by the Muslim Council of Britain's Media Monitoring Unit. I do wonder, Douglas, what is the impact of these complaints? There seem to be plenty of them, and how does that impact how these stories are reported?
Well, Rita, I mean, it impacts absolutely everything. It impacts the ability of the British public to comprehend or understand reality. There's a very good example of the consequences of these kinds of silencing and intimidating techniques, which is basically that anyone who writes in the British press about any issue to do with Islamist terrorism will be criticized by various of these bodies for spreading Islamophobia and so on, so that you can't say what the bomber said. For instance, if he said Allahu Akbar, you just got to say, oh, he has said some words. And there are consequences for this all the time. We just passed the 20th anniversary of the 7th of July 2005 suicide bombings in London, when 4 Islamist terrorists, homegrown, detonated suicide vests on 3 London Underground trains and a bus. 20 years on, the BBC's documentary, and other documentaries, in fact, about this, as my colleague Rod Liddell wrote about in last week's Spectator, if you hadn't been alive 20 years ago, or you knew nothing about those bombs, you could easily have come away with the interpretation of events that was basically some people from Yorkshire inexplicably exploded explosive devices and blew up and killed a lot of Londoners. As if maybe the bombs just let themselves off, or maybe it's just a problem with Yorkshiremen. This is the consequence of shuttering down free and open discussion like this and accurate reporting. The consequence is the general public will not have an accurate understanding of the reality that we have been in and that we are in now.
And so many in the media self-censor anyway. You don't need this complaint system. Just ideologically, many of them are reluctant to explain what is happening. So when you put this on top of it, and the Muslim Council of Britain's Media Monitoring Unit is also criticising works of fiction, Douglas, TV dramas that might show a Muslim character, for example, who doesn't want to wear a hijab, or a Muslim character who drinks alcohol or is gay. That's also, at times, attracting complaints.
And you have to understand that now is not a time that Muslims control the UK. If Muslims become the majority in the UK and they end up voting Muslim mayors and Muslim leaders, and they'll work on the system from the inside, they don't have control over Britain now. So what do you think will happen in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, everything is going to attract complaints from a professional complaints issuing unit. And that's what this unit of the Muslim Council of Britain, which consecutive British governments will not have anything to do with because they regard them as being too radical. This is what the MCB's Media Monitoring Unit does. It just fires off endless complaints in the hope that it basically intimidates editors and writers and journalists from saying accurately what they see with their own eyes. Don't forget that there are other consequences to this, and just one is worth reminding people of, which is that in Manchester some 10 years ago, the police did a training exercise for what would happen if a suicide bomber went off. And they and the emergency services were criticized because in the scenario practice for the ambulance crews and so on, the actor playing the terrorist shouted Allahu Akbar. All the local police in Manchester had to apologize for this. It was terrible to have done this. It was condemned as Islamophobic by all these monitoring watchdogs. And then it turned out that the suicide bomber at the Manchester Arena, was an Islamist terrorist, and he detonated about 9 months later. So this literal attempt to rewrite reality has consequences that are real.
Absolutely, and this is another consequences of the climate that has been created. A 12-year-old girl, Courtney Wright, she was removed from her class, Douglas, separated from other students, and then sent home. Her father was called to come and collect her. Why? Well, she had the audacity to wear a Union Jack dress on a day where students were encouraged to wear traditional cultural dress to celebrate the rich diversity of our community. Apparently, that's highly offensive to be wearing a dress featuring the Union Jack. This is a straight-A student. She's not a troublemaker, but she was told by teachers at Bilton School in Rugby that her outfit was unacceptable. She was removed from class. And Douglas, I don't know, perhaps if she arrived in a burqa, they'd be quite happy with that.
Yo, that's crazy. Why can't you be proud of the country you live in? Why can't you wear symbols that represent the country you live in? Why is this criticized and you get in trouble for it? But bringing a culture from a place that has nothing to do with the West, that is perfectly fine. That is acceptable. That cannot be criticized. That is appalling.
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it, Rita? Because, I mean, this is such a delicate era that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I'm sure that if she'd have turned up in cultural clothing of another culture that somehow, because of today's version of reality, you weren't allowed to do, she could have been sent home for doing that. She could have dressed up as a Native American and been sent home for that.
Yes.
She could have been. I mean, it's very hard to know what you're allowed to do in these days. If you're allowed to dress up in something representing your own culture, you can be sent home. But if you dress up as something representing another culture and it doesn't quite fit that day, you can also be sent home. So it's quite hard. It's not surprising that a child might tread on the wrong tracks on this, because after all, who knows what the rules are meant to be these days, other than, as this case shows once again, you're allowed to celebrate every culture other than your own if you're in the West. If you're in the West, you're not allowed to ever celebrate your own culture, but you can only celebrate the wonderful cultural diversity which everyone else brings.
Now to the US, and you've written for the New York Post about Zohran Mamdani's delusions of grandeur. This is a man, Douglas, who is the front runner, as we know, to be the next mayor of New York City. You think that would be a big enough role, but his ambitions, his focus appears to be on international issues. He says he's all about New Yorkers, but he can't help weigh in on foreign policy.
Yes, that's right. Zohran Mamdani has announced that he would have Benjamin Netanyahu arrested, the Israeli Prime Minister arrested, if he were to set foot in New York. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, was in New York last year for the United Nations. Most countries in the world, in fact, almost all countries, send representatives to the United Nations. It's one of the things about the UN being in New York. Lots of world leaders come here. But Mamdani decided to single out the Prime Minister of the Jewish state, but he's also in the past described the Prime Minister of the world's biggest Hindu state as also being a war criminal. This is very interesting to me, because why would somebody frankly, let's be honest about it, he's of a Muslim background, and he seems to be just reiterating certain Muslim political talking points. It's to attack a Hindu leader, it's to attack the leader of the one Jewish state. And I mean, this is just something we have seen a lot in Europe in recent years. And it's very striking seeing this kind of Islamic politics come to New York, because last year at the United Nations, the so-called president of the Revolutionary Islamic Republic of Iran spoke on the stage of the United Nations. We have not yet heard Mamdani say that if a representative of the revolutionary government of Iran sets foot in New York, that they will be arrested. Why? Why is it only the prime ministers of India and Israel who must be arrested in New York? Why, when President Erdogan of Turkey comes to the United Nations each year, I'm sorry, but the president of Turkey is currently occupying the north of Cyprus, which is an EU member state. Recep Tayyip Erdogan is an occupier. He's literally occupying at the moment. He's been repressing and...
That's a good point. That's a good point, but let me answer that question, because he's a Muslim and he doesn't criticize Muslims. He only criticizes people that oppose his views, which in this case are the Jews and the Hindus.
Attacking the stateless Kurdish people for decades. Why is Mamdani not calling for the detention and arrest of President Erdogan? I'm afraid this is Islamist politicking on the international stage being brought to the domestic stage in New York, and I think it has no place in a mayoral race, but it's very telling that this sort of politics has now even entered New York mayoral.
Guys, the fact that you live in the UK and you can criticize the wrongs in the country and the atrocities that happened by Islamists and that you can quote what they said is so bizarre. Why not? Why are you so scared of being labeled as racist or Islamophobes if it saves lives? I believe in free speech in the UK. I especially believe in free speech if you feel like there's any danger coming from a specific group of people. And I'm talking about Islamists who want to take over the UK and France and Canada and make it Islamic and Muslim. They bring values from their countries that don't align well with your values in the West. So you should be able to criticize them. You shouldn't be scared of being labeled as Islamophobe or as racist, as long as it saves your people. The British people need to rise up and remember the great nation that they are. They need to remember the great things they brought to the world, and they need to fight this now. Amazing people like Tommy Robinson are doing this. Amazing people like Charlie Veach are doing that. You should be doing that as well. If you'd like to watch more of my stuff, please check out my channel down below. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that notification button so you can be notified every time I upload new content. If you'd like to support me and the channel financially, you can do that using Buy Me Coffee or Patreon down in the links below. Also, we now have a Discord that you can join down in the link below. And now you can become a YouTube member and enjoy specific YouTube perks. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.